At the age of 21, Nanette Crist had an illumination experience, seeing the presence of God that appeared to her as a diamond sun. Her spiritual gifts were enhanced as she was led to the path of higher knowledge. She and fellow spiritual traveler Desiree Holmes Scherini met on that path and now come together to share with you the Diamond Sun secret. Hi, and welcome to Diamond Sun Secret with Nanette Crist and Desiree Holmes Scherini. And our topic today is about gratitude. And as we celebrate Thanksgiving here in the United States, hopefully everyone is able to celebrate in their own special way, preferably with loved ones and family, either near and far. And we also want to talk about history. And if we don't pay attention to history, we might lose some very important things. And Nanette has a personal family story to share with us around that that's really interesting. So go ahead, Nanette. Why don't you tell us what you want to share?
Well, there's been debate about how Thanksgiving got started, but I have an ancestor on my father's mother's side who came over on the Mayflower. Her name was Susanna White, and her husband, William White, passed away in the first winter in the Americas, which was very harsh. And she gave birth to the first baby born from the Mayflower in the Americas named Peregrine White. So Susanna remarried a man named Edward Winslow, and there is a portrait of him that exists to this day, which we'll share with you. Edward was a wonderful man who also was a good negotiator and sincere in his pilgrim beliefs, but he had opened the door to work with Squanto. Now, as many of you may know, the Mayflower was blown many miles off course. They had to take a lot of extra people on board that they didn't intend to bring, and when they finally arrived at Plymouth Rock, they were half-starved already. And so they got out and began, the first thing they did was build the church, because to them, establishing God as the center of their community and religious freedom was of the utmost importance. So when Susanna was married to Edward, they found out that the first person they met from the Native American tribe there was Squanto. And Squanto was the only man who probably spoke English, because he had broken free from some slave traders previously in another part of the country. And when he returned back to his tribe, unfortunately, it had been decimated by disease. And this was true across at least that part of the country. So the tribes were warring together against each other. And there was a tribe that was unfriendly that was taking raids on Squanto's tribe, and the tribe that was friendly with the Pilgrims. So they had their first Thanksgiving together, and it actually was such a good celebration that it lasted 3 days. And the first colonists had gone out and they had gotten several birds. We presume they were turkeys, and were sharing the birds and the other things that they brought with them. And the Native Americans said, we want to have this last longer. So they brought venison as well, and they had a 3-day celebration, and that was the first Thanksgiving. So Edward was able to negotiate peace with them. Unfortunately, some of the settlers were caught in the tribal war and compelled to have to bring the leadership of the warring tribe in. And this was not a good experience for them because they were killed. But their lives were also on the line as having befriended the other tribe. So when we hear about these things, we don't realize all the details. And I want to tell you something that almost nobody talks about. Edward Winslow and others kept detailed accounts of what went on in their diaries. And he describes not only that, but also the fact that the Native Americans offered that they would continue to give the colonists food because they couldn't have grown it already. They landed there in the wintertime. If they would become indentured servants, or essentially slaves, to the first Native Americans for a certain period of time so that they could get food until they were established. And so a number of them agreed to this. And later on, Mr. Winslow had other children with Susanna and went off to the Indies and died there. So she went through a lot of tragedy. She actually lost both of her husbands, and nevertheless was the first woman from the Mayflower who gave birth in America, was married in America, and she also became the ancestor of a number of governors and leaders in the colonies.
Would have had to have been, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And there's a connection there with Virginia Dare and that whole situation as well, and her first husband. So I was thinking to myself as I read the story recently that they gave up everything. They left their homes and their wealth and their families to come to America to establish religious freedom, because all of our other freedoms are based on that one freedom. If we don't realize that our freedoms do not come from the state or from some dictator, president, or monarch, but from God, then all of our other freedoms can be disposed of. And our founding fathers wisely understood this when they made the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But today we are encountering a number of situations where several governors and local officials are trying to abolish not only our religious freedoms, but our Thanksgiving as well, or at least limit it so it's not workable. And I think we need to talk about that today, and what can we do about it.
Yeah, I think it is very interesting, and that's a really interesting story. And I like that you can bring up some of this history. And one of the things that we should remember, and it's a common quote, is, history will repeat itself if we don't learn the lesson from history. And the big point being that these people left, potentially cushy lives because they had a conviction for their personal freedom to worship in their own way, or to have that freedom. Think about it. We're so spoiled. We're so spoiled. They got on a ship eons ago, hundreds of years ago, and went someplace that they really didn't understand, they didn't know, and awful conditions to just get away. And maybe a lot of you out there have had an experience where you've felt trapped and you had to take personal steps to get away from something because it didn't fit with your heart. It didn't fit. So if you look at the individual experience and compare that again to a group of people together embarking on that and going through the hardship to make themselves free, let me round back to, we take for granted that we have a freedom, and if you let that freedom be taken away, if you allow that freedom to be dictated by someone else, you will end up in a situation where pretty soon you or your children will have lost something that was fought so hard for. So, like I say, on a personal level, if you've ever been in a situation where you had to, leave a job, leave a marriage, leave a relationship, move out of a place that was very unhospitable, say a country, and come someplace or go someplace where you had a freedom and rights, to imagine going back there. So in the bigger picture, I kind of see a lot of current political changes being just like that. That what the Pilgrims fought for, it's almost like many Americans are getting back on the ship and returning willingly to the control and loss of freedoms.
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting way of looking at it. We look at the Revolutionary War too, and another ancestor of mine was Crist, and he came because he didn't want to be forced to marry a royal, which he was of royal blood in Germany. So he came here to get away from that and married a Swiss girl instead. And he became the right-hand man of George Washington at the Battle of Brandywine. So once again, he was wounded and almost died trying to protect our freedom and declare independence. Now they say it was because of taxation without representation, But today we have taxation with representation because our representatives, many of them, have been bought out by the very lobbyists that want to bleed the people dry, basically, because that way we have a bigger government and they spend the money as they see fit. And of course now it's well established that many of them are benefiting from that in a way that, well, they come into office and they're making less than $200,000 a year, and after a little while they've got multi-millions of dollars, and then they're helping out other countries that are hostile to us. So we have to look at this whole situation and what are we willing to sacrifice to secure our freedoms, because little by little they are being eroded away. Initially in the name of the pandemic, which some people say was a plandemic, and there is a lot of evidence to look like that is the case, and that as a result there were some of the leaders in America who said don't let any crisis go without taking advantage of it, and so they want to create this great reset worldwide, and the globalists at Davos and elsewhere want to reset our entire economy because basically they know that they've pretty much bled dry all they can, and a lot of countries, if not all the major ones, are technically bankrupt. And so by resetting, they're going to promise everybody debt forgiveness, and at the same time, in order to get your stipend to live on, because most businesses would close down and be automated, what they're going to do is offer everybody a minimum amount of money in exchange for them dictating to you about where you can worship, who you can associate, what you can do, if you can get medical attention, what it will be, etc., and everything else, basically all freedom. So you have to get vaxxed too, which is another issue. But looking at what we're focusing on right now, with Thanksgiving coming up, just as we are offering this sharing with you, we are now being told in some states that you have to limit your Thanksgiving to only 10 people.
Or 3 people, or do it outside in the cold.
Outside.
California. I saw one about California that, I don't know if it's every county, but there was something about you have to be outside, and you can't have more than a certain number of people, and you can't be in the same park as other family members going to that park. But people you don't know could be at that park. But you're not, like if a pod of, say, 8 of you go, the other group of 8 of your family members are not allowed to be celebrating in the same park. And you have to serve, your food has to be in individual serving containers. like McDonald's or something.
And you leave your mask on, and then you take it off and eat and put your mask back on. And some places are saying you're supposed to do this. It's beyond absurd.
It's almost like, let's see what we can make them do next, because certain things that just don't make sense at all. I'm like, how does this make any sense? And I know a lot of people don't stop to ask. And that's what I'm encouraging people to do. Stop and ask yourself, does this actually make sense? For example, if you can still go to a restaurant and sit, walk in with your mask off, take it off to sit down, and sit 6 feet away from many tables of strangers, how much sense does it make that you cannot be with family members that you probably see on a regular basis anyway? It's just...
I want to say 3 things about that. The first one is Gavin Newsom and other governors and mayors who have been proclaiming the most draconian measures concerning masks and social distancing have recently been caught doing exactly the opposite, along with their husbands or whoever. In Gavin's case, they went over to Maui, which I have spent a lot of time on, and they were filmed, no mask, close up, all of them having a big junket out there, and they weren't obeying any of their own rules. Same
because
thing with their children.
I think because they know that
that
there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah. No, and when you look at the fact that 99% of people will either not get COVID or recover from COVID successfully, then you realize that we have 100 other things that are more contagious that we have never isolated healthy people for. So this is something very different going on, and it has to do with the Great Reset. Because if they can keep people isolated and small businesses closed down long enough, then the globalists still have a monopoly on what's left. They'll be the only ones who still have money, and then they control the whole world economy and decide who lives, who dies, who works, who doesn't, and so forth and so on. So this whole thing with Thanksgiving, thank goodness some of the sheriffs are saying we are not going to have anything to do with enforcing this because we know it's not constitutional. And most Americans haven't had a chance to take them to court. And we have to remind our federal and state lawmakers and other public officials that they work for us.
Right.
They don't get to dictate what we do and take away our freedoms just because they feel like it and it fits with their globalist ideology. We need to let them know that not only will we protest, we will remove them from office and we will sue them at the very least. And this on the heels of them having shut down most of the churches for an extended period of time. We talked about this previously in another one of our programs, briefly, but basically many states have had, and cities, situations where you're allowed to go to the bar and sing, you're allowed to go to the restaurant, you're allowed to go to a protest.
Oh, protest,
nobody's going to peaceful protest,
they're okay.
of course. Nobody's going to say anything if you're shoulder to shoulder without a mask. You're allowed to go in subways. But you are not allowed to go to church and pray and sing unless you only have less than 25 people, no matter how big the congregation is, which is, again, selective prosecution and selective persecution. So those who want to maintain their religious freedoms and all American freedoms, which are based on our religious freedom, need to stand up and be counted, band together in groups of common purpose, and go after these public officials who are doing this, either have them impeached, first protest peacefully, recall them, sue them, and take the money together that's necessary to get the lawyers to do this. That's the only way that we're going to move through this time period without the whole world coming under the dominion of a dystopian society. What they're planning, believe me, I've researched this thoroughly, as I'm sure Desiree has, is way beyond 1984, and it's not the kind of world that anybody would want to live in.
Well, certain things for you as an audience, if you aren't familiar with much of this, excuse me, is you can look up Davos, D-A-V-O-S, the World Economic Forum, and just even look up what they, Agenda 2030, the plan, and you can read this, you can find their quotes. Klaus, I think is the man's name. Find videos of him describing this utopia that he describes. And a lot of the way it's presented is, of course, like, oh, it's going to be so wonderful. No one will have any needs. You don't need to have a private property or a car. Everything will be provided. And, you know, everything's going to be taken care of. And there's even a video of him talking about being given the vaccine that has the, I want to say, nanobots, kind of like something that's introduced into our bodies that will act as a communication device. And you just have to think, and it will be posted on social media if you want to. Now, that's like, oh, wow, that's amazing. I just want to think it and it's on social media. However, what's the flip side of that? If you just think something and it can be recorded on social media, where else can your thoughts be recorded? Now, he's talking about futuristic, however, the technology is there. And they've been studying this. So you may not be today, tomorrow, but think of your children. Now, some people think, oh, that's great, I like that. Fine, if this is what you want, but be educated and actually understand it. Understand where some of this is going. And you know, people say, oh, you're crazy, conspiracy theory. Look it up. It's not a conspiracy theory. Indeed, it is a conspiracy. And the World Economic Forum, people speaking there on several different places, I've seen video of them referring to the fact that COVID-19 gives them the unique opportunity to start and push forward this agenda. So when we say there is not that real threat from COVID-19 as it's being projected, it's apparently tuberculosis, I believe, is more contagious and more deadly, and it's been around for years and years and years, and there is a vaccination even. But do they lock people down? No. Often the flu over the broader group of people is more dangerous. COVID apparently is particularly dangerous for people with pre-existing conditions and the elderly. But the healthy people, especially younger children, there's no reason. And they want to globally vaccinate people. They have been and plan to continue shutting down businesses because it takes away personal power and freedom and puts people at needing the government to take care of them. And it's like they said, it's the unique opportunity to put this action worldwide. Take these steps. Just look it up and see what's actually happening. Is not what they're telling you it is. It's I believe it's not for your health and protection. It's for your compliance and for your fear and for you relying on what they say. And so many people are so terrified. They're driving down the street with a mask on, alone in their car. Maybe it's just more convenient than taking it off and putting it on. And here he is. As we're recording, I'm saying, I know that cat's going to come in here as soon as he hears us recording. But if you see my show, you're used to his visits. Anyway, so I get so frustrated when I see people not thinking for themselves. And the further this goes, the less you will be thinking for yourself if they have their way.
Right. In response to what Desiree just said, I'd also suggest that you research on your own Robert Kennedy Jr.'s organization called Children's Defense Fund. He is an excellent attorney. Yes, he is descended from the Kennedys, and he has spent all of his adult life helping to protect people from toxic vaccinations and suing successfully Big Pharma for billions of dollars in damages to those who were damaged. Also, mandating vaccines. There are, of course, companies and local governments that are going to try to mandate vaccines, even though President Trump has been against it. I don't expect that will be the case with most of the globalists. So we need to look into what are our rights and what exactly are these vaccines. When they say, for example, that they're 95% effective, or we have no way of really knowing that because they have admitted already that they didn't take the people who were vaccinated and expose them to the virus directly. So how do you know that it's effective if they haven't been exposed? That's problem number one. Problem number two is that among the vaccines that have been tested thus far, some of the companies had really serious problems with people having adverse reactions, and so they had to go back to the drawing table. Problem number three is that the whole idea behind vaccines is that you give somebody something toxic. We've gone through heavy metals, carcinogens, live viruses, aborted baby fetal cells, etc. that are, you can read the labels, it's all there in the vaccines. And then your body is theoretically supposed to react so that it'll build up antibodies to protect you from whatever disease comes along. However, sometimes it has the opposite effect, and I would say more often than not, and I've been a holistic health consultant for 40 years, so I can tell you that is the case, that it actually lowers your immunity the more vaccines you get, in my opinion. And
it does. Actually, the CDC website does indeed
say that. Now, the other problem with the new vaccines that are for the COVID is that they actually alter RNA and therefore DNA too. And as Desiree said, they send little nanobots into your body which actually have a portion of the COVID virus in them and get your body to go into the cells and start doing other things. But the big issue with that is this. If they are willing to go in and alter your DNA and RNA, we have a situation where you could be altered into anything they want to genetically modify us into. So why would we trust Big Pharma when we know that everything they advertise has serious side effects, almost without exception? And the only thing recently that didn't is the one thing they wouldn't allow as a therapeutic to be authorized by the FDA, which is hydroxychloroquine. Now, there's several things.
And it's been around for 70 years. But they made it like, oh, no, so dangerous.
Which tells you their motives are not as they should be. And I want to, with Desiree's permission, go ahead and share with you a story that we shared on another program. Mm-hmm. My ex-husband, before I was married to him, was made the CEO of a large pharmaceutical company. And the first week that he got there, the good old guys in the company who had been there for a long time said to him, "What is an acceptable kill rate? We need to know to determine the results of our tests." And he looked at them stunned and said, "There is no acceptable kill rate." At which point they told him, "We may as well close down shop then, because all of our pharmaceuticals, almost without exception, have a kill rate that's substantially beyond anything that we ever reveal to the public." So, since there are therapeutics for COVID-19, since there are natural remedies, which I'll get to in a minute, for COVID-19, since there are no need for something that you're going to have survival rates of 99% survival rate, to take a vaccine that is not truly tested because the people haven't been exposed to the live virus. The pharmaceutical company said, "Oh, that would be inhumane." So how can they say it's successful when nobody's sure they've been exposed? And the last part, that's the flaw in this whole logic, is that the tests themselves that determine whether or not you have COVID are highly inaccurate. So Elon Musk recently came out and publicly stated on film that he had symptoms, and so he had 4 COVID tests all on the same day. 2 of them told him he had COVID, and 2 of them said he didn't. Mm-hmm. All from the same machine on the same day. So there you go. We cannot rely on the tests in the first place. And the CDC recently lowered the amount of Americans that actually had no other comorbidities who got or died from COVID down to less than 10,000 people from 200,000. Well, that's because they were told or had to assign anybody who had symptoms like COVID, who died, no matter what else they were dying from, as having died from COVID. And they got more money that way, both the hospitals and the doctors, because the government was subsidizing it. We must always remember that subsidies always work, and subsidies always encourage the cause. So having worked in the legislature before and been a consultant for both political parties at the congressional level as a liaison to Washington, I could see a pattern that if you wanted something to happen, all you had to do was subsidize it. And then it would continue to happen as long as you continue to subsidize it. And this is something that is what we need to look at when we subsidize all these big pharma companies. And there has been no research, or practically none, into alternative treatments for COVID.
Because it's because who pays for those studies? And the thing is, for example, hydroxychloroquine, it is inexpensive because it's it's not owned, basically. It's a free.
It's inexpensive.
It's because no big pharma owns it.
Right.
It's whatever it is,
it's quinine.
But I'm saying the license or whatever is not owned by big pharma. So if they can't make money off of something, they're not going to spend money to find out how to use it. So the reason that they would invest in studies is because it makes them money if it works. So anything that's freely available and expensive, over the counter, that is not from big pharma, it's not being studied because there's no interest for the people that have the money to do the studies to do them. So people will say, "Oh, well, there's nothing that proves that's effective. There've been no studies to prove that's effective," because they're not doing the studies because it doesn't make them any money. So it's this cycle of course you're not going to get proof in a large enough study like Dr. Fauci said. Well, when there's a study that proves its effectiveness, then I will say, great. In the meantime, I do believe he is associated with Moderna. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I'm sure that he will be happy to say that one's safe to use, even though there have not been large studies done, because you can't do large studies on it because it's being pushed forward without the testing. over years, which he declined to say that one thing's not going to work because it hasn't had the studies. However, the vaccine, you should take the vaccine. So there's hypocrisy going on there.
Not only hypocrisy, but apparently kickbacks, and this needs to be investigated.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the politicians who are speaking in favor of China, who are speaking in favor of Big Pharma, are themselves invested or receiving money from those organizations, those companies, or they're actually lobbying and paying for their campaigns. Same thing with a lot of district attorneys. This has to be stopped.
Yeah.
However, it can be done. We have to re-examine that. But I do want to touch on one other thing here, and that I had COVID early on. I caught it way back in the end of February, early March. Temperature flew up to about 103. I was by myself at the time, and I prayed that God would make sure that I didn't get delirious and go running outside into the Chesapeake Bay. And I just knew that since I already had all the food I needed, since I already had all the remedies that I needed, I just had to take them. And of course, there's no record of a specific holistic remedy because they haven't been tested. But the ones that I took were known to be more effective than the complete pharmacy. And by that I mean they're antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, even kill spirochetes. So, of course, I started taking my organic vitamins, C, D, and zinc. Then I took olive leaf liquid, which is wonderful because it did more than anything else that I took for this specific situation. And I also took colloidal silver number 30, which will not turn you blue. It's only if you take the wrong dose or too much of it that you can turn your skin blue over a long period of time. I also took what I call Mother Mary's tea, which I'm working with a company now to see about creating that so we can bring it out forward to you, which is a species of rock rose that's also antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, has more polyphenols and super antioxidants than anything else that you can take. So I drank quinine water as well, which is the raw form of hydroxychloroquine, which is easily available. So I got better where the fever went down, and I didn't want to take it down artificially because that's what kills off the disease, but I got better in a few days from the fever. I was still in a very weakened condition, and when I did have a little cough, it came out bloody. That's how I knew it wasn't a normal influenza. There was no body aches like influenza. It wasn't like a bad cold. It was just these other things. And then after recovering, which really, there's still some malaise. I can't work as many hours as I used to without taking a rest. I found that I needed to do something more because I was getting what's called COVID toes, where your blood vessels and veins have been, arteries and veins have been damaged and inflamed and irritated. So it's like getting bruising where your toes suddenly swell up as if somebody smashed it with a hammer. And some people get it in their fingers. So I realized I had to do something for that. So the holistic remedies for that is turmeric, which reduces inflammation, along with the vitamins I was already describing. And I took rutin and bilberry, which rebuilds the blood vessels and veins as well and strengthens them. And so now, after a couple of months, I'm not having those symptoms anymore either. So I honestly think that we can use a complementary modality of both holistic and allopathic safe remedies, proven safe by independent sources that have no special interests or funding, which is not the case with most drugs now. And together, we can overcome pretty much any disease.
Yeah, and as we're trying to keep our episodes to about half an hour or so, I'm going to use that to circle back to the Native Americans, to the settlers, to the first pilgrims coming. And, there are remedies and natural herbs and tonics that have been around for thousands of years that people, indigenous peoples from all around the world, they knew how to use and create medicines a long time ago. And it's only, in the last, say, 50 years that we have Big Pharma come in and replace so much. So unfortunately, what was natural, normal, and the first way is now called alternative. Alternative because Big Pharma has replaced nature with these, chemical mixtures that can have so many bad side effects and ironically increase the need for yet another medication, and as well often are addictive. Although there are definitely those natural medications that can be addictive too, right? But
chocolate.
yeah, or maybe the alcohol I put in my tonic water, that could be addictive. But I encourage people to really stop and think about nature, about what you put in your body, about like why would you want to introduce something that could potentially not be good into a system that's working well, right? And I was talking to my dad about this last night about the vaccine. I said, Dad, you've been healthy. You've been fine. You have not caught anything. And I think he did have it as well back in like January, February. He had a cough that lasted like 6 weeks. And I said, if you're doing fine through all this time, and he's not been one to lock himself up in a closet, he's been out and socializing, going to restaurants and whatever. I said, why would you want to introduce something that potentially
puts the virus in you?
Could be worse for you. I mean,
Yeah.
all the stuff that's in a vaccine.
Right.
I said, and he was like, well, maybe I'll wait a year and see how it looks, And after a year, you know what? I bet it's going to be gone. The COVID.
Right.
The threat of COVID may be, it's okay now. How if they've introduced a vaccine and start, if people choose to take it, but on top of that, then naturally people are not having it. However, or maybe the vaccine will turn out to, unfortunately, maybe if you're exposed to something, make it worse. I was also thinking about the people that take the flu vaccine,
Yeah.
and then they're going to get the COVID vaccine too.
Right. And most people that got COVID already had the flu vaccine.
Yeah, I have a friend, actually, true story, where her friend that had pre-existing condition, probably in his 50s, went and got the flu vaccine. And she said he got the flu vaccine and he didn't feel well afterward, and he never felt better, and he died of COVID.
There you go.
And this was just recently. So I just wonder if that didn't kind of push him over the edge, if he,
because his immunity was already
decreased.
And then there's the cytokine storm where you have
Yeah.
a huge immune reaction too when COVID is active in the body. And so whatever else is irritating it is going to create a bigger cytokine storm, because that's your body's defenses. They're rallying, so they become overloaded. Now, all pharmaceutical drugs, almost without exception, are simply concentrated, synthesized forms of Mother Nature's cure. So they'll go to the jungle and they'll find a Native American cure of what cures this disease in its natural leafy form, and then they take out the active ingredient, concentrate it, make a chemical synthesized version. So when it goes into your body says, ooh, that's not natural, I'm not going to be able to use that. And so it either reacts to it or it throws it out of the system. Either way, it's not the healthiest alternative. Now, sometimes you have to take allopathics because it's a real urgent situation and there is nothing else known. But over time, people will come to learn that there's a whole host of holistic remedies, and we're going to talk about some of those in the future. So you can have them on hand and protect yourself and your family. I'm currently researching other things that Native Americans use to cure plagues like smallpox and so forth.
That's fascinating, yeah. And so, as a matter of fact, on that note, I think we can say goodbye for now, and you will be back with another episode where we can explore that more, about more of that. But circling back to what we started with, and as you can tell, we're pretty passionate about protecting health and your right to health without intervention that you don't want to agree to. But remember to be grateful and appreciative of the freedoms that are your natural rights. And remember to be so appreciative and so grateful that you remember to protect them. And think back to those people that went through all the hardships to create a country, to come and create a reality where you're free to worship. You're free to, be with your family members. You're free. If you choose differently, if you say, I don't want to be around anyone, that should be your choice. But it should also be your choice to be with your family, go to church, walk around and breathe fresh air out in public, and not be pushed into fear.
Yeah.
Not be pushed into fear. So
the number one thing that's going to save America and the rest of the world is to not live in fear.
Mm-hmm.
To be, yes, reasonably cautious based on the facts, but pray, meditate, be activists, call your legislators, write to them, demand that our freedoms be restored, that integrity in elections be restored immediately, and that join groups to challenge in court if you're in a state where that's going on. So thank you. God bless you. Cherish your loved ones, and we love you too, and hope to talk to you soon.
And thank you for being here and joining our conversation. So see you next time.